All right. Hello, AP people. Welcome to another fun, exciting edition of political discussions. So let's start off talking about this whole video is just going to be about supranational organizations. Supranational organizations are groups of countries that have banded together to create a super country. And supranationalism is the concept of countries wanting to join together to create a larger country network that has some sort of political power. And that power usually is going to be based on economic power, but it could be sort of cultural reasons that a bunch of countries join together. It could be for military purposes that kind of share each other's military resources, work together militarily. So I'm going to tell you about all the large multi-country organizations here on planet Earth. And these supranational organizations, they all sort of bring up a question of, do country governments matter anymore if these country governments have to report to a supranational organization? So let's check it out. These are some examples I'll talk about today. All right, so the EU is probably the supranational organization that we hear the most about. The European Union is the EU, and there's a whole bunch about it in the key issues. Also, I have this reading packet on my website that talks about kind of the EU and like, is it a good organization? Is it a bad organization? But honestly, the largest supranational organization in the world is the United Nations, the UN. Basically, every country in the world is a part of the UN, so the UN is kind of the winner of supranational organizations. I think today the UN has 193 countries in it, and based on how you define how many countries there are in the world, there's maybe 10 or 12 countries that aren't in the UN, and I'll cover out why those countries aren't in the UN on my next presentation. But so I have a whole nother presentation about the UN specifically, and I'll kind of have this debate whether the UN is good or bad. But I'll save more details about the UN for my next presentation. But the European Union, though, I'll make sure I just cover this fully. The European Union is a economic supranational organization. All the European Union countries decided they would get rid of their old form of money. I mean, France used to have the francs, Germany used to have the Deutschmark, but they got rid of it, and everybody uses euro money, except for the UK. The UK never accepted the euro, and now the UK quit the European Union as well because they thought they were getting a bad deal economically. So, and that can be a whole FRQ for one day in the future of why did the United Kingdom quit the European Union. It's mostly because they were getting a bad deal. But yeah, let me zoom out on some of these, talk more about the EU and the UN. So the EU, since the 1980s, it's sort of hard to say when the EU officially got started because for a while it was called some relationship between Germany and France, and then just more countries kept joining up. And it's mostly an economic thing. It's free trade, it's open borders, and it's just really connecting the economies of Europe. And for the most part, Europe has improved overall because of it. However, the United Kingdom says, well, we were really good before the EU. Now our money is kind of being shared around Europe. We don't like that. But yeah, this is the best example of supranationalism on the global stage, where all these European countries are uniting together. So this used to be the EU. I mean, the UK has now quit. But yeah, no trade, no tariffs. See, I'm using the word from the last presentation. Totally open barriers to movement of labor and people. If you grew up in Paris, you can get a job in Berlin or in Rome, and you'll move all around Europe. It's free, open travel. That's pretty great. And especially if you look historically, Europe has been the most violent continent in the world. Europeans have hated each other. They had 2 world wars about how much they hated each other. But now the European Union finally looks like peace in our time. So you could even argue that it's a military thing, wholly because if countries are so connected economically, they're not going to go to war with each other. And then, yeah, I think all these green countries, yeah, they've all joined since 2007. I think Croatia is officially a part now. I don't think Turkey's in the EU yet, but Turkey would really love to join. And then here's the United Nations building. This is in New York. I'll talk about that more later. Supranationalism. So, yep, I'm going to talk about all these organizations, but obviously the EU here is in light blue. But as you can see, many countries around the world are uniting in these supranational organizations, and that's great. And there's EU money. And I remember I talked to my mother about this. She traveled Europe back in the 1970s before it was the European Union, and she said it was a hassle to trade the British pound to the French franc to the German Deutschmark to the Italian lira, and it was too much work to have so many different styles of money, and it's a lot more just efficient for people to have one kind of money for all of Europe. So that's pretty great. And there's the United Nations building. Okay, now let's talk about the World Trade Organization. So, the World Trade Organization is a very controversial organization. Their whole idea is they want free trade everywhere. I like the World Trade Organization. Some of my friends say it's literally the devil. So, well, we could have a debate about it in class if we were there. Hopefully I'll try to mention all the points about it. But, so the WTO, roughly 60% of the countries in the world are involved with the WTO to some degree. It's generally all the wealthier countries are in the WTO. And the WTO tries to make rules and agenda where all the member states economically benefit. Well, if you're not with the WTO, and the WTO sets all these standards for how oil's going to get sold around the world, how the Chinese factories are going to be able to sell stuff around the world, it really makes countries that aren't involved feel really left out, and they're going to get really pissed off. And also, it promotes this kind of globalism where there's a lot of offshoring of jobs, a lot of outsourcing of jobs. So the WTO is controversial, and if you are a Midwest worker in a car factory in Detroit, you can literally point the finger at the WTO and say, that's the reason why our jobs are going to China, because the WTO makes it easier to do international business. And yes, their goal is total free trade. And yeah, there is the accusation that there is sort of financial suffering happening in the third world, that the developing world isn't getting as good of a deal as the developed world. The environments of the developed world are being sacrificed. I mean, all that environmental damage and pollution in China and in Brazil. The WTO isn't exactly telling them to stop, and it's sort of encouraging the development of these countries to the point where they're destroying their environments. So that's another thing the WTO has against it. All right, I know there's a lot of writing on this, so just stop it now if you want to learn a little bit more about the WTO. Let me just keep bouncing through. So this is their symbol. If you ever see it, that's WTO. Here they are sitting at a big old circle, so it's all the major countries in the world talking about how to improve their economies. And yeah, trade volume, America and China. Believe it or not, we did just a tiny bit more trade than China in 2012, which I'm surprised. But for the most part, we're the two big economic players. Behind us is Germany, Japan, and then a bunch of other European countries. Oh, and hey, South Korea, welcome to the team. But yeah, our world is not for sale. The WTO is evil. They're sucking all the life out of planet Earth. Oh, they're so bad. And then map of country, members, and observers. So members, oh wow, a surprising amount of African countries are members. Yeah, and it says right here, members, but they're represented by the European Union. So even if Germany, France, Spain, UK have some issues they want to talk about in the WTO, they can't. Their representative of the European Union talks on their behalf. So interesting. A whole lot of Arab countries. Yeah, what is this? Iraq, Libya, Algeria, North Sudan. They are not members of the WTO. So, I wonder if there's a Arab culture thing that kind of pushes them away. And some of these Central Asian countries aren't involved either. And of course, North Korea isn't involved. North Korea hates everybody. Somalia also not involved because they don't have a government. And then what do we got here? So some shipping containers. That's all super cool. What do we got here? Low share of intertrade for Africa as compared to other regions. So yeah, a whole lot of trade happening in Europe, Asia. North America is about half the trade. South Central America, not as much. Africa, almost nothing. So I think it is fair to say that the World Trade Organization is kind of leaving Africa out of the loop, especially when most of sub-Saharan Africa is in the WTO. So there could be kind of that part of it's nasty. And then what does it say? WTO trading away our forests. WTO is bad. Stop the WTO. Corporation, so evil. A lot of the same reasons why people hate Monsanto. They probably hate the WTO. All right, now let's talk about some more supranational organizations. ASEAN, as I like to call it, Asian, spelled wrong. So ASEAN is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So it's all these countries sort of between India and China and Australia. They're kind of united together, and they're sort of trying to be their own version of the EU. So they're in talks of creating the ACU dollar. So what are some of these member states? Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Philippines. What up, Philippines? Indonesia. All unite together in the same way the EU united, to have one common currency, to have open trade borders with each other. And I think it's a good idea. I think that this part of the world is typically neglected. And if they did all unite together, they would be a stronger economic force, a stronger political force. Because I know, for example, if you considered the European Union as its own country, it would be the wealthiest country in the world. And all these ASEAN countries, maybe Singapore stands out, but the rest of them aren't like top tier countries. But hey, if you united together, you could be a serious political player. So this supranational organization exists, but it's still kind of in its early baby stages, and no ACU dollar currently exists. I don't think they currently have open borders with each other, but I would expect in the next couple years they'll actually get this thing going. So just know ASEAN, know its symbol, and it's just all these Southeast Asian countries uniting together. I'm surprised they got Myanmar and Thailand to unite, because these two countries have hated each other for all of human history. So interesting stuff. All right, let's check it out. So here's all the flags of these countries uniting together, and then look at all these little ASEANs uniting together as one big country. Oh, great! And then yep, there they are, and ASEAN, the connectivity. All right, the African Union. Yeah, it's kind of the same thing as the European Union and ASEAN. It's all the countries of Africa, the North and Sub-Saharan Africa, all uniting together. I mean, I think that North Africa is very culturally different than Sub-Saharan Africa, but hey, you want to call yourselves the African Union, you want to bring everybody involved, fine. I think it makes very much sense that Africa has traditionally always been a neglected part of the global economy, and if they all united together, they could have a much stronger say. They are talking about economic cooperation. There's currently no talks about a common currency. There's currently no open borders. This organization does exist, but its primary purpose right now is military peacekeeping. So this the other organizations were about economics. This one would like to be economic in the future, but currently they just have this sort of shared military where the AU military goes to trouble spots around Africa and the soldiers of the AU military keep the peace. And that's really smart because, as we know, a lot of conflicts are in Africa, and I think they would have problems if a bunch of, white soldiers came to Africa. They'd be like, oh no, imperialism part 2. So I think it's just more culturally appropriate for other African countries to do peacekeeping within Africa itself. It's also just geographically easier as well. So just know the AU, it's currently kind of a military cooperative where all these countries commit their militaries to help keep the peace and help keep their governments intact. So here's the symbol of the AU. Here's all the AU's representatives. And then, here's the idea. Parts of Africa are pretty rough, but you send in the AU military, and these guys keep the peace. And here's Muammar Gaddafi. This guy's dead now. He's one of the dudes who started the AU. He was the former dictator of Libya. He was a douchebag of a dictator, but he did want to create supranational organizations and create a stronger community within Arab countries and also within Africa. So I guess that's maybe the one good thing he did in his whole life. His people generally hated him, and someone shot him in the face. All right, and then here's AU soldiers helping out people of Africa. And then, yeah, so here's the just sad truth, too. The leaders and representatives of the AU say that they're doing a great job. They say that they're keeping the peace, that Africa is more stable because of them. But in reality, a lot of the guys a part of the AU, like Muammar Gaddafi, for example, they talk about how great they are. Yes, but look, they're literally wearing gold, okay? So, yes, they've united Africa, but they're not helping the people of Africa as much as they could be. So they're a ship going nowhere, and they don't even let journalists sort of analyze the things they do. It's just more corruption in African governments in some ways. Okay, now let's talk about NATO. Oh man, this is an excellent supranational organization. NATO has no economic implications at all. There is nothing economic about NATO ever. It is entirely a military alliance. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and it's all the countries of the North Atlantic united together, and the only rule of NATO is this. If any of our countries are attacked, we will consider it as an attack on us, and we will all commit our militaries to helping each other out. NATO is the most successful military alliance in the history of the world. It has kept more or less world peace for the last 80 years. NATO was the sort of expected alliance for World War III. For so much of the last 70 years, there was the assumption that a World War III would break out between the Soviet Union, Russia, versus the United States. And in the event that that war broke out, we had this locked-in treaty agreement with all these other countries. What do we got? Canada, UK, Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, Norway. All these countries we were preemptively aligned up to fight the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union collapsed. So it was never utilized for its main purpose. The only time NATO was ever invoked was on the day of September 11th, 2001, when some terrorist jerkfaces blew up the World Trade Center in New York. Literally every single member of NATO, their prime ministers or presidents, called up President Bush and said, hey, we signed the NATO treaty. America, we got your back. Whoever blew up those buildings in New York, we will commit our militaries and help you. And yes, literally every NATO country helped in the invasion of Afghanistan, where we found and beat up the terrorists who did that. So that's cool. I'm happy that NATO's a thing. Donald Trump says that NATO is now outdated and we don't need it anymore. But I like the idea that America has a military alliance with almost all of the Western world. It makes us way more militarily powerful. And I think I can confidently say this. Yeah, see, right here. All together, the NATO members account for 70% of all military spending in the world. I am beyond confident I can make this statement. If the entire world, we're talking about Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, the former Soviet countries, Far East Asia, and developing Asia and China all unite together and start World War III against NATO, NATO would still win. Because, yeah, we have 70% of the world's military. We have almost all the fancy military equipment. It's almost a joke. It's like if any country in the world declared official war on NATO, we've got machine guns and they've got sticks. Like, we're gonna win. So that's how confident I am in NATO being awesome. So here's NATO's symbol and all the flags of the countries that are part of Team NATO. Here's the official map of NATO. And yeah, NATO's still active today. Donald Trump doesn't really like it. I like NATO. I think NATO's cool. So it's just about every country that touches the North Atlantic. So most of the Western world. I think even Australia, South Korea, and New Zealand are like half members of NATO too. So we've also got them on the team. And yeah, NATO's defense forces, because I know that Syria has been having their civil war and ISIS, and Turkey is a part of NATO. So Turkey called in NATO to send in a bunch of military support along their border, and that's what we've done. So good job. Contributing NATO assets. Spain and Italy are sending surface-to-air missiles. Wow, epic. And yeah, so the only time NATO has been ever used was because of this terrible day. And what else we got here? So when countries join NATO, I think it's funny that during the Cold War, almost all these countries I'm circling right here used to be a part of the Soviet Union. But when the Soviet Union broke up, quite a few of the former Soviet countries, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Romania, they have now all joined Team NATO. So welcome to the team, guys. You broke away from Russia, and now you're a part of us. So welcome aboard. And what do we got here? European Security Order. So a lot of these European countries are still kind of freaked out about Russia. Russia is probably the number one military opponent to the United States in the world. But I'll say this, Russia is not as strong as they used to be. Back when they were the Soviet Union, they were a serious threat. Nowadays, Russia's like half the threat of what they used to be. So this is just showing you some of the military bases, some of the missiles, some of the NATO soldiers. And I've talked to plenty of people who were soldiers during the Cold War, and a lot of them were stationed, in like Germany. They were right on the front lines with the supposedly evil Soviet Union. But Soviet Union isn't a thing anymore, but NATO's still around, and I'm glad they are around. All right, and then here we go, all the countries of NATO. Awesome. All right, now CARICOM, Caribbean Community. So the CARICOM countries, it's also now, once again, back emulating the European Union and ASEAN, saying that they want to be an economic cooperative of all the Caribbean island countries. So Saint Martin, I'm talking about you. Yep, and all these 15 Caribbean island nations are in it so far. There's actually a lot more than 15 countries. I find it interesting that Mexico is like a halfway member of this. So, sure. But yeah, it's they want to have a common currency called the Caribbean dollar. So this is kind of their idea, to have one united currency. But it's still not fully trusted by the population. And I even remember myself, when I toured the Caribbean on a cruise ship, what was this, like 12 years ago, even though some of these islands had their own currencies, they all just preferred US dollars because a lot of their economies were so screwed up, they couldn't even accept their own base currency. But I think CARICOM is a great idea. I wish them to have more advances in the future, because a lot of these countries are really, really tiny, and they could have a much greater sense of importance on the international scale if their economies were united. So here's all the flags of the CARICOM countries, and that's their symbol. CARICOM, the Caribbean Community. Hey. And yeah, the dark green dots are the super committed members. So what do you got? Jamaica, Belize, Haiti, Suriname. I don't even know all these island countries. And then the ones in sort of the lighter green are like half committed members. And the tealish color here are like also considering commitment. So more and more countries I expect will join this in the future. And once they sort of get their act together, like this is what they want their money to look like. So the Queen Elizabeth, even on CARICOM dollars. That's how important the British royalty is. So what do we got here? The British Virgin Islands, Antigua, Montserrat, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Trinidad, and Tobago. They beat us in the World Cup. I remember that one. All right. And now we go, NAFTA. Oh, man. I think I've already talked about NAFTA a couple times in this class, but here it is officially. It's the Supernational Organization for the United States that it's our supranational organization that's about economics. And this case, there's only 3 players of NAFTA. It's Canada, America, and Mexico. And it was our big trade agreement we signed in 1994. And it was just open borders, no tariffs, total easy economic cooperation between these 3 countries. I think it was originally designed to sort of stop illegal immigration, because we said, hey, we don't like illegal immigration coming into the United States, so why don't we just let Mexican people work in Mexico, sell their stuff here, and they can make money and make Mexico a good place too. maybe it's slowed down illegal immigration some, but I mean, some jobs are people sort of have to physically be in America to make money in America, and I think those jobs can't really be stayed in Mexico. But yeah, so total free trade and investment between these three countries. I know that Donald Trump ran on the platform of killing NAFTA, and I know that he did. Donald Trump destroyed NAFTA, but then he immediately replaced it with an agreement called like the new North American Free Trade Agreement. So he just calls it new NAFTA, and it sort of does the same thing. But there's a lot of pressure in NAFTA, especially from people in the Midwest. They claimed that NAFTA was one of the reasons why they lost all their jobs and why they were so upset with Obama and the economy. But I mean, most of those jobs went to China. They didn't really go to Mexico. So that's a whole other issue right there. Okay, well, what do I personally think about NAFTA? I think NAFTA is a good idea. I like free trade. But obviously, some Americans will lose their jobs. More economic stuff will go to Mexico. So I think that the world should have free trade. And I could go deep down into why that's the case. So anyway, let's check out NAFTA. So here's NAFTA's 20-year-old birthday cake. This was in 2014. And then what do you got here? Here's sort of the timeline of NAFTA. So Canada eliminates tariffs on Mexico stuff. Elimination of all remaining tariffs on U.S.-Mexico stuff. So everything should be free, open borders between trading of all three of these countries. And then here's some people probably in Detroit saying that they hate NAFTA because now their jobs moved to Mexico. And yep, North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA and Mexico's economy. So gross national income per person. So I think Mexico definitely got the best deal from NAFTA. And the reason why that's important is because if Mexico was super poor, then illegal immigration would be out of control. By opening the borders with Mexico and allowing Mexico to develop, it's ultimately going to create a better neighborly relationship between the United States and Mexico. So yeah, Mexico's gross national income, GNI, doubled in the last 20 years, which is great. And let's see what we got here. So who's benefiting the most from NAFTA? We sell $246 billion to Canada. Canada sells $255 billion to us. So Canada's getting a little bit of a better deal. And then we sell $212 to Mexico. Mexico sells $271 billion to us. And so yeah, Mexico's getting a way better deal. And then yeah, Mexico's trade to Canada is more than double what the back trade is. So yeah, I think Mexico absolutely got the best deal from NAFTA, and I think that's important because Mexico is the least developed country, and we should be good neighbors. So it's a good thing. And here's Trump trying to close the door on NAFTA, which he sort of did, but then he immediately reopened the door again with a new name, which is weird. All right, OPEC. Oh, man. Oh, OPEC. This is a super serious supranational organization. So OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. This is our first supranational organization that's kind of geographically spread around the world. Most of the OPEC nations are here in the Arab world, but then also they've got Nigeria, Angola, Venezuela, and Ecuador. What up, Ecuador? Welcome to the team. So what does OPEC do? They are the primary oil-producing countries in the world, and this is actually a true fact. They are a cartel. They have found out that almost all the oil in the world comes out of these countries, so they're going to artificially set the prices higher or lower. They'll all work together to all become more wealthy based on oil revenue. So it's all about petroleum and oil, okay? That's the whole point of OPEC. 80% of all the oil reserves in the world, and OPEC sort of says like, hey, you guys got to do what we say, or we're going to charge you double oil prices. That happened really famously in the 1970s. So in the 1970s, the country of Israel was, I think, just talking mad crap to some Arab countries. And a lot of the OPEC countries are Arab countries. So these OPEC countries said, you know what? Anybody who likes Israel, we're not going to sell you oil anymore. So they obviously stopped selling oil to Israel. And then when America was like, hey, we think Israel's pretty cool, OPEC said, well, you know what, America? We're not going to sell you any oil anymore. So OPEC put sanctions on the United States, and for, I think, 6 months, we didn't get any oil coming into this country. We ran out of gasoline. Things got really, really bad in the United States. Because, yeah, and I'll show you some of these pictures. I mean, imagine going to a gas pump and there's no gas. Your car can't run. The economy grounds to a halt. It was terrible. So, yeah, and here, right here, this organization is a cartel because they talk to each other and keep oil prices artificially high. If OPEC didn't exist, I'm pretty confident that oil could be as cheap as 50 cents a gallon. But because OPEC is a thing, they work together and they only sell oil at higher prices. So it's smart for them, and it's pretty weak for the whole rest of the world. So anyway, that's OPEC. Let me bounce through these pictures. So here's their symbol. It's OPEC, just know what it is. And they're all the oil-producing countries of the world. So yeah, OPEC's share of world crude oil, it's so much oil, nowhere else basically even matters. And then here's pictures from the oil embargo in the 1970s. It was mostly led by Saudi Arabia. Usually we're pretty cool with Saudi Arabia, but they were really pissed off at us because of what we were doing with Israel. So what do we got here? Gas shortage. All these cars lined up to get gas, but there's none in the pumps. Limited to 10 gallons of gas per customer. Also around this time, we lowered the speed limit because a car actually runs the most efficiently at 55 miles an hour. We didn't want people to waste oil if they didn't have to. And yep, here's where all the OPEC countries are. But the main players are definitely Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran. Iran and us never get along. Libya has a good amount of oil. So does Nigeria. Venezuela has the most oil. Yep, and here's the OPEC countries together. A lot of Arab guys. And hey, man, like, I don't care what it's costing me. I need it. So yeah, what's Uncle Sam's fix? It's OPEC. He's just putting it right in his veins. America can't get enough oil. And what else we got here? OPEC. Who do they have on a line and hook? The United States. Yeah, I should learn from this. We're hooked. So it's sort of saying, if OPEC demands that we do something, we kind of have to do it because, well, we need oil to run our country. All right, Mercosur. Oh, man, this is a fun name. And I think there was a question about this on the last AP test, and like every kid got it wrong. So Mercosur, the South American Common Market. So it's sort of like ASEAN and the European Union and CARICOM. It's one of these economic ones. And it's the union of Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. Other South American countries are associate members. So you can more or less say that just about everybody in South America is at least loosely connected to Mercosur. But their whole thought is free trade, free movement, talking about a common currency. So they're also kind of in the baby steps of maybe one day becoming the European Union. Because they realize if we're economically connected, we'll be a more powerful country at the international scale. So here's Mercosur, but it's especially the bigger countries of South America. What are they doing? So a lot of bananas, fruit, coffee. So a lot of this primary industry. Wow, how am I so bad at this? Primary production kind of stuff. Primary sector stuff, that's what I meant to say. Here's the primary exports from this part of the world. Whole lot of petroleum up here, because yeah, Ecuador and Venezuela are also a part of OPEC. But yeah, a lot of copper. Copper is really important for electrical equipment coming out of Peru and Chile. And then transportation equipment. Yes, Brazil makes almost all the cars for all of South America, the more you know. And then, yeah, what is this? The Korean Mercosur Trade Agreement. So South Korea and Mercosur are now officially doing trade deals with each other rather than do a trade deal with all of South America. It's just easier to do. And so Mercosur, is it improving stuff? So Brazil's now almost doubled their exports. Argentina's almost doubled their exports. Uruguay's definitely improved. Paraguay's improved. Venezuela's improved a little bit. So, yeah, every country does better when they all sort of work as a team like this, which is why I love free trade, and I love more and more international or supranational organizations working together like this. All right, the Arctic Council. Oh, this is a fun one. So the Arctic Council is all the countries that touch the Arctic Circle. So if you are at the top of planet Earth, you're a part of this team. It's Canada, Denmark, Norway, Russia, Canada, USA, Finland, Iceland, Sweden. Yep, and this one's not necessarily economic, it's not military. This one's just about protecting the Arctic environment and also to sort of have some fair discussions of oil drilling. I don't know how serious the Arctic Council is. Yes, Russia and the United States are both a part of the Supernational Organization, but the only thing we ever talk about is what are we doing with the top of planet Earth? Because it's difficult to understand who owns it, especially now that with the globe warming, some of the ice that used to be here at the top of planet Earth is now melting, and we can now have international shipping go from northern Russia to northern Alaska really efficiently. So it's honestly changing the way we're doing international trade. And it's good that all the countries that touch the Arctic circle are going to have some rules about how it's going to be ran. So here's the Arctic Council's official symbol. And yep, it's literally every country that touches the Arctic Circle, so that's kind of cool to know. And this is what you'd normally see. A whole bunch of icebergs, seabirds, polar bears maybe. But now we have the technology to cut through some of the ice in the Arctic. And yep, the ice is breaking apart because of global warming. And there is oil up there in the Arctic Circle, so there's a lot of contentious discussions about which countries are going to get it. And yeah, so here's some of these shipping lanes that are now forming. You can sort of go above Canada and above Russia. I think still in the middle here there's too much ice, but as the globe warms, maybe we can now just do direct ship access from the northern half of the world to the other northern half of the world. And yeah, I don't think this picture is super legit, but you know, what's going to happen to all these polar bears when there's more and more trash up there? So these are discussions that the Arctic Council will have to have. All right, that's it for Supernational Organizations. This one's for the next time. So, yep, one more video in this series, and I'll be all good. So anyway, peace out. Shoopa-doop-a-doo.